Hey everyone, my name's Tormey, and today I'm going to be giving a talk entitled An iOS Developer's Take on React Native. So before I get into my talk, I'm going to give you a little bit of background information about me and my career so you can better understand my perspective when I talk to you today about React Native. So first and foremost, as you might have guessed from my accent and the warm introduction I received, I am Irish, but I didn't actually come here today from the green hills of Ireland. No, I flew all the way from San Francisco in California, where I've been living for the last 10 years. Now, for most of that time, I've been blessed. I've been working as a mobile software engineer. Yeah, so anyway, I was working at a bunch of mobile startups doing native development, a little bit of HTML5, and then I went on to work at some big companies. I worked at Apple for the guts of 2 years in the core audio team, mainly doing Objective-C with a little bit of C++. I then moved on to Facebook, where I worked for 2 years in the main Facebook iOS app on two teams, the commerce team and the search team, mainly doing Objective-C++, mainly working with a framework inspired by React called Component Kit. I did do a little with a bit of React development there, but absolutely no React Native. So fast forward to today, and what do? I work as a consultant/contractor who specializes in mobile, mainly iOS, and most pertinent to this talk today, React Native. Now, at this point in my talk, I want to stress that I am not a React Native evangelist. Hallelujah. The reason why I kind of rolled out my career was to kind of stress the native emphasis of my background. I'm not a web guy who's coming here to try and sell you that you should give up Swift and switch over to React Native. Heaven forbid you do that. What I'm going to do with this talk today is I'm going to explain how React Native works and clear up any misconceptions you might have about how it's similar or different to other frameworks that often get conflated with React Native. After I finish explaining what React Native actually does, I'm then going to take on the role of the defense and make the case to you for React Native. I'm then, after that, going to take on the role of the prosecution and make the case against React Native. And then at the very end, in case you're confused, I'm going to leave you with some heuristics that you might find useful if you're trying to decide whether React Native is a good fit for you or your organization. So now that that's out of the way, I want to conduct an informal survey. If you have written an app using React Native ever, could you put your hands up, please? Oh, wow, I'm scared now. OK, put your hands down. If you have written an app using a framework called Cordova, could you put your hands up, please? Ooh, I think there's more Cordova developers here. OK. So how does React Native actually work? Well, a good place to find the answer to that question would be the React Native developers docs. And if you go there, you'll see the following line. React Native lets you build mobile apps using only JavaScript. JavaScript. Now, I talk to a lot of native developers, and that image just conjures something in their mind. And that image is hybrid mobile app framework. So a question that you might be asking here, seeing as the vast majority of you haven't done anything with React Native, is React Native yet another hybrid mobile app framework? And the answer to that question, no. But I think because this conflated idea of React Native being a hybrid mobile app framework often occurs, it's worth exploring what a hybrid mobile app framework is, and more importantly, why React Native is a totally different beast from that. OK, so what is a hybrid mobile app framework? Harry, we've never done this before. We don't know what it is. Can you explain it? Yes. Here's a picture of a hybrid mobile app framework. No, I'm only joking. A hybrid mobile app framework is basically a native container that wraps a web page, some CSS, JavaScript, HTML, and that web page is basically the user interface for your app. It basically allows you to take this web page and stick it into the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. That's kind of what it is. So, if you're familiar with the history of mobile development, these hybrid mobile app frameworks tend to have a bad reputation, both among developers and consumers. Now, because these hybrid app mobile frameworks are often conflated with React Native, I think we should explore why. So why do hybrid mobile apps have a bad reputation? Well, in my opinion, it's largely for two reasons, which I'm going to go into right now. The first one is that they use web views. Now, if you think about that for a moment, If you use a web view to display your user interface, fundamentally you have a middleman that sits between you, the developer, and the underlying rendering pipeline and memory management system of the device that you're writing for. You can't stick a UI collection view or UI table view in the middle of a web view. It's either a web view or native code. And that fundamentally constrains your ability to create a rich, native-like user experience. So I think that's a big reason why they kind of suck. The second thing is, and going back through my career, the last time that I did web development before Facebook and doing React Native stuff was about 2011. And that's about the time that hybrid mobile app frameworks were really in vogue, prior to Facebook and LinkedIn abandoning them for native, the true religion, by the way. So why did web development used to suck? What was it about it that made it really crappy? Well, in my opinion, it was basically because the abstractions that you were forced to use back in the day, like jQuery and a bunch of HTML and CSS that had to work with all of these weird desktop browsers that had these problems, were very poor if you were coming from a world like native iOS development where you had view controllers with a life cycle and you had model view controller and other kind of nice design patterns that made your software kind of awesome to work with. So if you were a native developer doing web development back in the day, it seemed like crazy town. The good news is that web development has improved a lot in the last 5 or 6 years. And the story of React Native and why you should keep an open mind about it has a lot to do with the things that have improved web development. So why has web development improved? Well, in my opinion, it's kind of down to 3 things. And the first one of those things isn't just specific to JavaScript. It's the rise in popularity of functional programming. And specifically, the impact that this has had in the way that web and other front-end frameworks are designed. React is a functional framework. It uses a declarative way of describing UIs, and it takes data in a unidirectional fashion. The other thing that you might not be aware of that's kind of gotten really big in the JavaScript world is transpilers, language-to-language compilers. So originally, these were kind of developed because new versions of JavaScript would come out, ES6 and ES7. Developers would obviously want to use them because old JavaScript kind of sucks. It didn't have classes and promises and all that kind of stuff. But how are you to get them into production where lots of people are on crappy old browsers? Well, the answer to that is you transpile the language down to a version that those browsers support. A side effect of this, though, was that transpilers allow JavaScript developers to bolt on features that weren't present in the language. So you can actually have type checking in JavaScript now via Flow or TypeScript. You can also inline markup languages like JSX alongside your JavaScript. So the tool chain that JavaScript developers have these days is much more advanced than the ones that were present back in 2011. The other thing is that JavaScript as a language now has stuff like classes and promises and much nicer abstractions. So in my opinion, it kind of sucks less than it used to do. Okay, so what is React? Well, React is kind of like the thing that React Native is built on top of, so we better understand this in order to understand React Native. So, if I was to use one line to express what React is, it's basically that your UI is a function of your data. And you're like, Harry, that's very abstract. Can you be more specific and give us a concrete example? Well, let's consider a really dead simple user interface. A label that displays a count, and a button that when you push it, updates the count. Well, if you were expressing that, it would be the UI is a function of the count, the data. But what does that look like in code? Now, I'm going to pause for a moment, because there's a lot to unpack here. This is React web code. Now, the stuff below the return statement there that looks like HTML, that is not actually HTML. That is JSX. The stuff that's above there, where it's getting the count, that is actually from the data store that's associated with this React component. Keep that in your head for a second. So this is not HTML. This is what's known as the virtual document model. This is a description of the UI that React is then going to take and translate into HTML and CSS, which your web browser will render. This is an important point to note. So how do you update state? This is a fundamental question for all front-end developers. So if you were to think about this app from the point of view of an Android developer or an Objective-C developer or an old-school JavaScript developer, you basically get some kind of reference to that counter, and you'd set a value on it. With React, you don't do that. How do you update state with React? Well, you use something that's called setState. So this is a zoomed out version of the React component that I showed you earlier. And as you can see, it is a class. It extends components. And as an aside, components are kind of roughly analogous to view controllers. They have lifecycle functions and so on. And basically what's happening here is we're wiring up a set state call to when you click on the button. So what's going to happen when you hit this set state? Well, the set state increments the data. The data, the store, causes a new virtual DOM to be rendered or created. React, under the hood, diffs the tree that represents the old UI with the new one and handles basically updating all of this stuff for you. It only blitzes to the screen the stuff that has actually changed. So here is a model of this with trees, in case you like visualizing it like that. So how does React Native work? Why is all this relevant to me? Well, just as React for the web takes your description of the UI and converts it into HTML and CSS, React Native takes your description of the UI and converts it into native components for the platform that you're targeting. It does not use a web view. It converts it into, on iOS, UI views, scroll views, and so on and so forth. So you're not actually going through a web view. This is fundamentally a big change because it allows you to wrap and embed UI collection views. And if you run into performance issues, you have a get-out-of-jail-free card, unlike with hybrid mobile app frameworks, which don't. So let's revisit the code again. So this is what that counter app looks like in React Web. In React Native, it's basically exactly the same thing, except you're using views and text and buttons, React Native components. So the same ideas and the same constructs still apply. And as you can see, and if you're familiar with old school jQuery, in my opinion, this is a much nicer set of abstractions to work with and is much closer to what you would be used to if you were a native Android or iOS developer. Okay, so let's take a step back and look at this from a system point of view so you have a better understanding of how this actually works under the hood. So in React Native, there's kind of like two realms. There's the native realm that does all the heavy lifting, and the JavaScript realm that basically is where all your business logic is written. So if you tap a screen, or if a network timer event goes off or something like that, an event occurs in native. These events are then batched and serialized and passed across what's known as a bridge to JavaScript core, which is running in a separate thread. JavaScript core then processes these events, and React decides whether the screen needs to be updated or something else needs to be called. And this will result in basically native methods being called, and that gets serialized, passed across the bridge, and then React Native then updates the UI if it needs to in the native side. So again, a lot of this example I shamelessly listed from one of the React Native core developers' presentation. His name is Alexander Kotalarski. He's a really awesome developer. He has a talk entitled React Native Under the Hood, where he goes into this in a lot more detail. I highly recommend you check it out if you're interested in this sort of stuff. Okay, now the defense has taken the stand. What is the case for React Native? The first article of evidence I'm going to present is performance. Because when I started out with React Native for one of my clients, I was very skeptical about performance. I was worried that we were going to run into all sorts of issues with images. In fact, once you have an understanding of React Native and how it works under the hood and how it's different, you don't really have the performance issues that you think you will. So even though most of our app code is written in JavaScript, the UI of our app itself is completely native. The UI is manipulated exclusively on the main thread, but there can be others for background computation, sizing, and so on. React Native does most of the heavy lifting in this realm for us. In the JS realm, which on iOS is powered by JavaScript core, JavaScript is executed in its own separate thread by the JavaScript engine. Our business logic, which includes which views to display and how to style them, is usually implemented here. So where do performance bottlenecks tend to occur? Well, basically it's at the bridge. So all of React Native apps have code running in two realms. Variables defined in one realm can't be directly accessed by the other, so you need a bridge. This means that all communication between the two realms is done explicitly over this JavaScript bridge. Each realm by itself is blazingly fast. The performance bottleneck often occurs when we move from one realm to the other. In order to architect a performant React Native app, we have to keep in mind that we need to minimize passes over the bridge. So stuff like this can occur with like animations or gestures. But the good news is that it's not a problem. It's actually very easy to optimize so that you basically keep all of these animations on the native side without even having to dig into code. You can actually specify this quite easily in JavaScript. So again, to recap, React Native doesn't use web views. This is of massive significance for performance. It's easy to wrap native components. So if you want to basically do all of your layout as a collection view or whatever, you can stick that in the middle of a screen that's powered by React Native, no problem. Optimizing the React Native bridge is relatively easy, and other performance issues that you can run into are usually overdraw issues. I've run into a few of those, and they're usually a function of poor choices in third-party libraries or a lack of knowledge of the developer tools. They're generally been pretty easy for me to kind of optimize and get around. So how do you wrap native code? I'm not going to go into this too deeply, but like an Objective-C, you have a few different options. You can use macros to wrap functions. It supports emitting events. It supports callbacks. It supports promises. And it allows you to specify the thread that your native code runs on. In Swift, you don't have macros. You have to use modifiers, but all the other things in that list apply there. So here's a brief example. Basically, if you want to wrap some native code, you implement this interface, and then you wrap your functions like so in the following macros. Emitting events is also similar. You basically just have to call a delegate function in order to do that. And React Native sets all of it up under the hood. So in case you don't believe me and you want some more information, I actually wrote an article where I take a classically slow app, a big scrolling list of images of cats and random stuff, and I make it fast. I do most of this in JavaScript. There's a GitHub repo. You can check that out. But at the end of this article, there is a plot twist. And that plot twist is that I take the JavaScript image code, like the list code, and I move it over to native. It's Android. Sorry about that, guys. And I wrap it in a recycler view. The plot twist is you don't actually gain much performance from doing this, and in the article I kind of go into why this is the case. But again, I have loads of statistics, graphs, and all that kind of stuff there. It's worth checking out if you're interested in that. And if you follow me on Medium, I'm going to be writing more about this. Other great articles on performance, which you might want to check out, is the excellent work done by this guy at Wix called Tal Cole. He has, my favorite article by him is Moving Bound Animations to User Interactions at 60 frames per second. So he actually presents some problems that you can run into with the React Native bridge, and he shows you how, because animations are deterministic, you can actually express them in such a way that they'll be completely done on the native side without going back and forth over the bridge. Now, you can't really talk about performance without holding something in your hand, because a lot of the time, native developers want something that feels native, right? So this app here is made by Wix, and it uses a bunch of their open source libraries. You can download this from the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store now. It's called React Native Interactions. The source code of this is available on Wix's GitHub. It's really great to play with if you want some kind of solid proof that performance actually does feel good and the gestures are nice to use. Some other things I'm going to kind of touch on briefly is animations in React Native and how they work. The animations API is actually pretty nice. This is another thing that I was kind of worried about when I kind of got started with it. So this last image, let's explore how we do this. I'm not going to go into all the view code. I'm just going to show you a snippet. So again, this is a zoomed-in part of a React component. So component amount is kind of analogous to a view controller will appear. We're kicking off the animation once the component is ready to. And basically, this is a looping animation. What we're doing is we're taking the animated value, which is 0, and we're moving it to 1 with linear easing over 2 seconds. And then when it hits the end, we're going to loop back and start again. So in the render function, what we do is we basically take this moving value that's going to be passed down to it automatically by React, and we interpolate it over a couple of different ranges that relate to opacity, moving margins, text size, and rotating X. Those values are then passed down to the actual components that you saw moving back and forth earlier on. If you want to see more comprehensive demos of animations and play with some source code and read a really awesome article, check out Nadir Dabit's article on Medium and his GitHub, which lives at reactnativetraining.com. It's a really great article, and you can do a lot of stuff, like you can have animations in sequence, in parallel. It's a very sophisticated framework, and I've been very happy with it. Another case study of a top app that uses React Native in it is the Instagram app that's currently rewritten their saved images tab using React Native. They have a great case study about developer productivity and like issues that they run into along the way. I highly recommend checking that out. Here's a video from the Instagram app of a React Native component that they use for basically their promoted posts. So again, this is being used in production in, apps that are really, really at scale, that are being used by hundreds of millions of people. Another great app that's completely written in React Native is the Facebook Groups app. I don't personally have the Facebook apps installed on my phone, not because I hate Facebook. I love them. They were very nice to me when I worked there. But I'm a really easily distracted person. So I have the Facebook Groups app, and it's a pretty good app. It's all written in React Native. You guys should check it out if you're curious about that. Okay, the performance bit is out of the way. Hot reloading. Well, I made a very special video of what my day is like. So this is one of my clients, a medical marijuana app. They allow you to sign up for medical marijuana in the state of California. Unfortunately, not in Germany yet. But I'm going to just change this to be hi UIKonf instead of hi Harry. So the editor that I'm using here is Atom. Incidentally, you do get breakpoints and all of those kind of good things with React Native, and you can also use Xcode to debug the native parts of it. But this is basically what my day is like, and that's pretty awesome. As that app grows, that reload time doesn't get any slower. Also, you can do this on the device over Wi-Fi. You have a little shake interface, and you can hit reload, or you can wire it up in a way so that when you save the file, it gets pushed over to the device. So when you're working with designers, or if you're trying to kind of like get some business log hashed out, this is much nicer than Playgrounds because you don't have to play around with setting up frameworks and stuff like that. So this probably is one of the biggest productivity wins that I get from it. So a topic that you're probably all really interested in is cross-platform apps. So my clientees, I wrote 2 apps with them, a driver app, which is kind of like Deliveroo for weed, and a consumer app where people can sign up for medical marijuana, both of which are only in California. So we also have a web team at Ease, and basically they're all really strong React developers, which is awesome. So we are able to use 100% of the API code for that, some of the business logic. We haven't really tried to reuse the UI because I'm a little bit skeptical of some of the third-party libraries that allow you to share web and mobile, but we could probably reuse a lot more of that. On the consumer Android app, basically 90% of our code base is shared. The reason why it's not 100% is basically material design and different UI conventions on Android. We tried to kind of keep our apps in line with what Android users would expect, but again, it's really, really great. On the driver app, we have some proprietary security and geolocation code that is native, and so that's why it's only 70% there. And whenever we have to touch that code, we have to do it for Android as well as iOS. It's also super easy to special case in the code by platform. We just have an isAndroid function, and if isAndroid, render the material design button. If is iOS, just do the other normal button. So over-the-air updates. They are pretty awesome. So JavaScript push is allowed by the App Store Terms of Services. You can't push native changes. That's not how React Native works. But it is easy to tie code pushes to binary versions. So for example, if you were trying to push some JavaScript that relied on some native code that wasn't in a version that was released, you can say only roll this out to version 1.x or whatever. It's also, in case you screw things up, really easy to roll back releases. And you can also do staged rollouts, like say roll out to 25% of our users on iOS or 25% of our users on Android or whatever. So JavaScript code push, scary, but kind of awesome. So team productivity. So I think that React Native really, really, really shines in shops that have a web team that are on React and whose Android and iOS developers are open-minded enough to try it out. So, on our team, we had a new girl start, Kyle, who was a React developer, and she was able to basically within a day rewrite part of our sign-up flows to match some changes that had been made on web. So for React web developers, this is really awesome. Also, while I was working with my client, All of the React web developers were able to give me help and code feedback. Erica, she's my awesome Android co-worker. She's a very strong engineer. She's also able to give me really, really, really great feedback, and we're able to review each other's diffs. And it's basically kind of double the amount of work that we can get done, because we can basically work in the consumer app and the driver app in parallel, and we just have to kind of check each other's code at the end to make sure it works on Android or iOS and kind of tweak some things that might be broken along the way. Okay, Harry, this all sounds so awesome. This is like, we're ready to give up Swift. What is the case against React Native? Is there any problems with this? Is everything all sunshine and rainbows? And the answer is yes. There is issues with React Native. So ramp-up time, I think, is one of the biggest. This stuff doesn't come for free. This is not like a weekend project where you're learning a new framework. Basically, Erica, I've trained a few experienced Android engineers. So to give you an example of level, I have about 8 years mobile experience, and Erica has about 8 years mobile experience. She's worked at companies like Amazon and Walmart Labs and stuff like that. It took her about 1 to 3 months, like myself, to be writing good React Native code. Now, that's not because React is inherently really complicated or JavaScript is hard to learn. It's basically that in order to write a moderate to kind of slightly large application, you have to basically learn about the third-party ecosystem in the React Native world. So unlike iOS or Android, where right out of the gate, Google and Apple do an awesome job of giving you pretty much everything that you need to build a sophisticated app, basically with React Native, you get very few things. You have to rely very heavily on third-party libraries. So one of the things that I wanted to show in this presentation, but I had to cut due to time constraints, was how you manage basically data stores and state across multiple screens. So in order to do this, you'll probably need something like Redux. And Redux is a lecture all unto itself. It's really, really awesome. The guy who wrote it, Dan Abramov, is an amazing software engineer. But there's a whole ecosystem of stuff that you tack onto Redux, like Redux Sagas, Redux Thunks. And it's basically a lot to learn. So learning the right patterns, learning the correct third-party libraries to learn, that's a lot of work for a native developer, especially someone like me who's not a JavaScript aficionado. So web developers, the good news is they ramp up really quickly. They're able to be really productive, but they're going to hit a wall in native because they are not really smart like you guys and able to understand Xcode and Android Studio and all of these performance issues, and they're not able to look under the hood at these React Native libraries to see if the Swift or iOS code is making dangerous assumptions about it. So you guys have a very valuable part to play on any cross-functional team that's doing this. So the next case in the prosecution is the third-party libraries. So there are 5 different nav stacks in use with React Native right now. There's one from Wix, there's one from Airbnb, there is React Router, there is React Native Flux, and then there's React Navigation. They all have different pros and cons, and they can all get you into a world of trouble if it's not quite what you're looking for. This is completely ridiculous, and I'm hoping that over the next year or so, this resolves itself. The other problem with a lot of the third-party libraries is that if you thought that CocoaPods and Carthage had a quality problem, it's nothing compared to JavaScript. You really need to check every single thing that's not sort of a brand name library that you should be using. I would also give a shout out to Redux. It's totally awesome, but usually you don't just use Redux. You use something like Redux with Redux Thunk or Redux Sagas or Redux JS. Dude, there's tons of white papers and stuff on this. It is a lot of work to learn and decide whether that's actually the right focus for your team. If you have web developers and you're thinking about React Native and they're familiar with React, they will be a lot of help in coming up to speed with the pros and cons of these. But again, this is part of why it takes 1 to 3 months to kind of ramp up with React Native. The other issue with React Native is when you go to update these third-party libraries. So every month, Facebook ships a new version of React Native. It's usually awesome. It usually has bug fixes. But every now and then, this will break third-party libraries. So keeping on top of this and dealing with basically all of these third-party libraries is a massive pain in the butt. And yeah. So the other thing is Android is buggy. I know we've made a few digs at Android, but React Native Android came out far after React Native iOS, and the level of stability really shows. So, generally a lot of the stuff that we did worked straight out of the box, but we did have to kind of fight with some third-party libraries and, manually kind of patch stuff ourselves to kind of get it over the foot. Some of these buggy issues are, related to Android just in general having to support a wider spectrum of devices and stuff like that, but some of them are just inexcusable. So for example, all of the JavaScript-based navigation stacks break accessibility on Android. So the reason the Facebook Groups app gets away with it is that it's displaying modals. It's not actually doing a deeply nested navigation stack. So my colleague Erica actually discovered this when we were doing an audit of our code. It totally sucked. She was really pissed off about it because at Walmart she had worked a lot with blind people. So again, if you're not willing to kind of dig up your, roll up your sleeves and dig into this, this may not be for you. That being said, it wasn't that much work for us to get our apps working on React Native Android. So I'm going to just leave this here and just say, all of these transpilers and all this stuff is great, but you guys have been learning Swift, and Swift is awesome. And some of you are just going to say, screw you, Harry, I'm not learning JavaScript. I looked at the 3 equals sign, and that was enough. I ran away screaming. And I'm not going to try and sell you on that. For many people, this is just going to be a deal breaker. Okay, so Harry, we're really confused. You've told us all this awesome stuff about React Native, and you've made a case against it. What should we do? Is there a simple table that we could use to help us make this decision? Yes, I stole this slide from one of React Native developer called Ryan from San Francisco. He gave this slide at a talk, and I thought it was great. I've updated a little bit. So it's basically maybe, maybe not. So if you know React, if you have lots of web developers but few mobile developers, if your design is brand focused, kind of like Airbnb's, not heavily native, you're not just doing apps for the Apple Watch, and you have cross-functional teams, or you're willing to invest in React Native, this 3-month ramp-up time, or you want over-the-air code updates, maybe React Native is for you. If you don't know JavaScript and React and you're coming at this from scratch, it's a lot of work. If you already have an iOS and Android team, maybe they're already really productive, and maybe bringing this in will cause a lot of politics. And this is something that I have a lot of hiring managers come up to me and talk to me about, and it's something that if you're trying to force this on a team, will cause people to leave. There is a lot of politics in adopting something like React Native because essentially you're asking your mobile engineers to take a bet on their career in a technology they may not be happy about doing that with. So again, these are just some things for you to think about in the maybe, maybe not field based on what you're thinking. So again, this is sort of a recap of the pros and cons slide, the talk that I've given so far. So, I do consulting, contracting, and training. I'm actually teaching a React Native workshop June 4th in Chicago. I had hoped to kind of teach one here. If you guys want to see a more complete React Native demo, come grab me after the talk. I also have a Medium blog at launchdoor.com, and my Twitter is htormey. And I just want to say, I love coming to Berlin, and I think this conference is absolutely awesome. I'd like to say thank you to Engin and Maxim and all the people who made this possible. This is an absolutely amazing event. I'm having a lot of fun here. And I also want to say thank you to Ease, my client who offered to pay for my flights over here. They are hiring in San Francisco if you guys are interested in that. But thank you very much, and I'm honored to speak for you.
Great job, Harry. I have a feeling that any questions you have for Harry are going to be long and involved. And coffee and drinks await.
Yeah, let's do some beers.
Hi. So I have a small technical question here.
Hi.
Yeah. So I have experience using Unity 3D, and it's like a game engine framework. And it works great if you stay inside the framework, but if you go into native, it's really hard to debug and it's really hard to just develop there. So how is it React Native? If you do something on the native side, is it? How does it work? Debugging and stuff like this?
That's a good question.
Thanks.
So with a lot of the Deliveroo version of the app, because the medical marijuana company, they have a distributed warehouse. So all the little cars that are driving around with people in them actually have thousands of dollars worth of weed and other stuff in it, for the patients. So all of that, whenever we have issues with basically the location code and the security code in there, it's a little bit of a pain in the ass to debug because you have to just go into Xcode, or you basically will send traces to the server using, I think, Segment is kind of what we use for analytics. So again, it's but if you're an Android or an iOS developer, it's basically the same thing as debugging native code, right? So, like I haven't really dug into many situations where there's been an issue going back and forth across the bridge. Because usually, like from the Xcode logs, you can see like both the JavaScript logs and the native logs, and usually kind of problems kind of manifest themselves in one specific area. So the strategy that I use is to kind of isolate it to kind of like either a native issue or a JavaScript issue. And if it's a JavaScript issue, it's not that bad to debug because you can just basically hook it up via Atom or whatever you're using and kind of step through the code or put in some logging statements. If it's a native issue, because I am an iOS developer and I've been doing this stuff for years, like it's just like native debugging. It's not really that much of an issue. So because the realms are kind of very cleanly separated, I generally find it's not that big of a deal. But if you don't know iOS development or if you're relatively new to JavaScript, it's kind of a pain in the ass. Oh yeah, one cool thing that I forget to mention is you can travel through time with React Native. So there's this really cool tool by Ignite that basically allows you, because React Native is functional, to replay basically all of your states in Redux, right? So you can rewind back up until the point that you had a network error and replay it again. So that's actually kind of like really cool if you're doing sort of development and you have a cool test harness with like, web stuff or network requests in it. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Harry. We're sadly running a little